All right, this is part two to the previous video I did about Dillian Whyte's failed test and the people claiming that he's the victim of weaponized drug testing. Now, first of all, just to address the idiots who watched only a couple of minutes of my video and got their wires completely crossed about what my position is, I'm not defending Dillian Whyte. I'm not saying that this theory that people have come up with is true. I'm just presenting what people are saying, and I actually, if you listen to the whole video, presented counter arguments to it. Do you not understand that concept? Anyway, moving on from the idiots, people have rightly asked the question, why would Eddie Hearn sabotage his own show in that way if he was the one behind this alleged spiking of Dillian Whyte's PED test or whatever the case may be? Why would he waste all his time selling the fight to the public, putting it on pay-per-view, only to pull the plug at the last minute and disappoint everybody? That makes no sense. This is what many people are arguing. It's a good point. The counter argument to that would be, well, maybe they were planning to fight Robert Helenius all along. They budgeted for the Helenius fight all along. And when they pulled the plug in the end, it can't be blamed on DAZN or Eddie Hearn because one of the fighters failed a test. So from a PR perspective, their fans can't really get angry at them. So maybe it's worth, just for clout, just to create some hype and just to give the fans a non-pay-per-view fight at the end, to kind of lift their spirits. It's worth doing all this nonsense and carrying on with the pretense that Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua are going to have their rematch. That's what somebody might counter-argue. But then you look at it and you think, well, Eddie Hearn could have just not picked Dillian Whyte in the first place or not gone with that fight in the first place. Would he really go to all that trouble just to save face? At the end of the day, everybody knows Anthony Joshua is on a comeback trail. And after all, what we're talking about here, the allegation that people are making against Eddie Hearn, you're talking about a criminal conspiracy. If you're involved in spiking somebody's PED test, that's literally criminal charges attached to that. Is Eddie Hearn so desperate that he would go to those lengths? Yeah, we know he's desperate to some extent to deliver for his broadcaster, so on and so forth, but there are levels of desperation. Would Eddie Hearn really risk potential jail time just to protect one of his fighters? Yes, there are people in the corporate world of politics who are above the law in practice, but is Eddie Hearn really one of them? And even if he was, would he really feel the need to exert that power to protect Anthony Joshua from Dillian Whyte, a guy who he's already knocked out before? Sure, he's got this big fight with Deontay Wilder looming in December or January for an awful lot of money. Would Eddie Hearn be desperate enough for that money to do something like this? Now, another theory, which is similar, it's the same theory really, but different culprit, that some people are putting on the table, is that it's the Saudis who are behind Dillian Whyte's failed PED test. And since Derek Chisora actually works for Skill Challenge, I never realized this, but Eddie Hearn actually revealed it the other day in an interview, that's why he knew in advance that Dillian Whyte was going to fail a test, because he had inside knowledge from the people he works for. And the motive for them is securing the Anthony Joshua-Deontay Wilder fight. They don't want anything to derail that. So that's what some people are saying. I'm not saying I'm agreeing with it, people. I'm just laying out what others are arguing. They're saying that the Saudis are using their enormous money and power and influence to get to certain people in these drug testing agencies. And the Saudis aside, as I mentioned in a previous video, there has always been a very heavy criminal element in boxing at a high level. And there still is. Don't ever get that twisted. If you think the people behind MTK were a one-off or an anomaly, you're a fool. Now, obviously, in some countries, the criminal element in combat sports is bigger than in other countries, but it's there to some extent in pretty much all countries, or at least most countries, where combat sports generate a lot of money. And some of these organizations are so powerful that they've got politicians, police, judges, and so on in their pocket. If you think people with that level of power, who can have all those types of people in their pocket, can't get to people inside testing agencies, again, you're a fool. So the concept of weaponized drug testing is not ridiculous. I'll give you an example of a fight where the fighters themselves or their teams were concerned, and that would be Vladimir Klitschko versus Alexander Povetkin. There was a big row in the run-up to that fight over the PED testing. Klitschko refused to use Povetkin's testing agency. He insisted on using the German testing agency, even though the fight was going to be in Russia. Povetkin refused to use the German one. So there was this big standoff, and at one point it looked like it was going to jeopardize the fight. Eventually, they came to a mutual agreement that Klitschko would use his own agency for the testing and Povetkin would use his own, and never the twain shall meet. That's what they did. Why else would they do that than to avoid any funny business? Deliberately contaminated samples and the like. With all that being said, my position and what I'm thinking, what's at the forefront of my mind, is the fact that Dillian Whyte has form. He's failed 2 tests before, and he's tried to make out as though AJ is on something in the past. When people do things like that, it makes you suspicious that they're trying to justify their own PED use. Again, as I mentioned in a previous video, Dillian Whyte, to the best of my memory, has never been a guy who readily accepts responsibility for bad things that happen to him in his career. He typically likes to point fingers at other people, deflect the blame elsewhere. He's not the only fighter that does this, obviously, but he's one of them. After 3 failed tests, how long are you going to give Dillian Whyte the benefit of the doubt? Doesn't there come a point where you got to look at a guy and say, he's a cheat, he's lying, he's been doing this for years? Now, I can't tell you conclusively that Dillian Whyte is guilty, but as it stands right now, before all the evidence has come in, my provisional position is he probably is guilty. Maybe I'll change my mind in light of evidence that we get, but as of right now, that's where I'm at. I'm thinking he probably is guilty and he's done something deliberately. And all this other stuff about a plot to spike his sample is interesting, but if I apply Occam's razor to the situation, it doesn't seem like the most likely scenario at this stage. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.